it's Mrs. Sobek, and I'm here to review with you the Unit 1 study guide. That's chapters 5, 6, and 7, so that you can get ready for your test. So if I were you, I would have my study guide out or in another tab so that you have a different answer than what I go over. You can make sure that you have the right information and you can study and do a great job on your test. While I'm talking today, at some point, I'm going to tell you a code word. You're going to need to know what that code word is for your assignment on Google Classroom, so pay attention. All right, so question number 1. What did the Magna Carta, the English Bill of Rights, and the Glorious Revolution help the colonists to develop? Well, you should remember from class that all three of those things are things that happen in England that really limit the power of the king. And so what they develop is what we call representative government, which means that people get a say in the government, and then it's not just a king making all of the decisions, but people get to elect and choose representatives who go and talk to the government for them. Okay? All right, getting into the French and Indian War in the next few questions. So question number 2. On what 2 continents did the French and the English fight in the French and Indian War? Well, you probably know from class that the French and Indian War is one small part of a bigger war called the 7 Years' War, that the French and English were fighting at home for them in Europe. And then they're also fighting in North America, and that's the part that the colonists are really concerned about, is that North American part of the war. Question 3. List 2 reasons why the French and English went to war in the French and Indian War. Well, first of all, it's all about the control of the land. They both want to control. Let my computer catch up with me. Are you going to type? They both want to control It's not catching up with me. The Ohio, you'd think I'd be able to spell Ohio River Valley. They want to be able to control that land, in particular because of the fact that they then want to be able to control the fur trade. You probably remember that fur, especially beaver fur, was really fashionable in Europe, and so if they were able to control the fur trade, they could make a lot of money selling those really cool beaver skin hats. Hopefully on your study guide you're going to spell control right, because apparently I can't spell it today and I spelled it wrong 2 different ways. Okay, after the war then, it asks us to name 3 effects of the French and Indian War, and I think that all 3 of them really go together if you think about it. So the first effect is that the French get kicked out of Canada. Okay, Canada, our neighbor to the north, passes from the French to the English. So now instead of the French being in control of all of this land, the English have gained control. And that's really exciting to the English colonists. So our second effect is that the English colonists want to move to that new land, right? They're like, wow, we just fought this war. We won this big chunk of land, and let us move out there. The land, especially that they want to move to, is what we talked about before, the Ohio River Valley. Because they know that that land is going to be good for farming and that they might be able to get in on that fur trade, okay? But the Native Americans aren't so happy at the end of the war. We have Pontiac's Rebellion, where the natives are rising up against the English settlers that are living in that land, and the king starts to think it's really dangerous for people to be out there. So England actually bans the colonists from moving west of the Appalachians. And they say that this is to protect them. And it probably was kind of true. It would have been really expensive and difficult for England to be able to keep all of those colonists safe if they were living out on what we call then the frontier. This ban is called the Proclamation of 1763, which is really then getting us into question number 5. Why did King George III want the Proclamation of 1763? Well, he wanted it because it would have been too expensive to protect all of the colonists who wanted to move west of the Appalachians. And what is it that he wanted to protect them from? There were Native American attacks that were happening out on the frontier. The one that happens right after the French and Indian War is called Pontiac's Rebellion. Okay, so you might be thinking to yourself, well, King, how are you going to enforce that? How are you going to make sure that no colonists ever go past the Appalachian Mountains? It seems like a really big amount of space to be able to control. And what King George does is he sends 10,000 soldiers to the colonies with the job of kind of keeping peace, keep making sure that people aren't going beyond the proclamation, making sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing according to his laws. Okay. This period marks the end to something called salutary neglect, which you can see in our next question, okay? Salutary neglect had been happening in the period leading up to the French and Indian War. And you probably remember that this was the hands-off policy, right? That Britain is ignoring its colonies. The colonies are kind of getting used to doing things themselves. So question number 7 asks us, how did salutary neglect lead us to self-government in the colonies? Well, what happens is colonists got used to making their own laws without the English. So they had been being ignored, and now they're really getting used to the fact that they think that they should be able to do things themselves. This is self-government. Okay. All right, we're getting into then chapter 6. So chapter 6 is where we really start to see the conflict heating up between the English and their colonies. The English are passing all kinds of laws. The colonists in general don't really like those laws, and so they disagree and they want to get rid of them. Okay, so question number 8 asks us to describe the differences between the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, and the Townshend Act. So let's start with the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act is a tax on documents, legal documents that had to be stamped in order to prove that you had paid the tax. It's important to note that that is a direct tax on the citizens. Okay, everybody had to pay that. It was really hard to avoid paying that tax. The Sugar Act was a tax on sugar and molasses. This is a tax on trade. Okay, you could avoid paying the Sugar Act tax if you simply didn't buy sugar. Okay, the Townshend Act is another tax on imported goods, and it's another tax on trade. Okay, you could avoid paying the Townshend Act. So if we're thinking about what are the differences between these three, well, it's really the idea that the Stamp Act is a direct tax, the Sugar Act and the Townshend Acts are not. Okay. All right. People get really, really mad about the Stamp Act. They're more angry about the Stamp Act than they had been about other laws. So it wants us to define protest and then name 3 kinds of protests that colonists used specifically against the Stamp Act. So the word protest means to refuse to agree with an idea or a law or something like that, and to publicly disagree. Okay, and so some of the things that colonists started to do to protest. Okay, one of the things that they would do would be they would kind of attack the tax collectors or the customs officials, they were called, and they would tar and feather them. Oh, I'm trying to write tar and weather. That doesn't make sense. They would tar and feather those customs officials because that would kind of scare them off of wanting to do their job. So they would tar and feather officials. Another thing that they would do, they boycotted British goods. They would say basically, hey, Britain, we know that you're making a lot of money off of us, and so we are going to refuse to buy anything that you're selling because we know that if you can't sell it to us, then you're not making any money. And that was smart because they were really hurting the British in the things that were going to be most painful to them. Okay, a third thing that they would do in protest of the Stamp Act was that they would send a petition, which means that they send a letter to the king saying, we don't think that the Stamp Act is fair and we want you to take it away. We see them doing that a lot kind of throughout this whole time period, that they're asking the king, please stop what you're doing. Please listen to us. Okay. Number 10, then, define boycott and explain 3 ways the colonists boycotted the Townshend Acts. So a boycott means that you refuse to buy. This is a really powerful tool that the colonists used because it hurts the British in what their reason is for being in the colonies. The British want to make money off of the colonies. If they refuse to buy British goods, it really hurts the British. It doesn't necessarily hurt the colonists. So how were they accomplishing that boycott? Okay. Well, they completely stopped buying British goods and trade fell off because they won't buy anything that the British are selling. Okay. But they take it a little bit further this time. Some men that we call, wait for my computer to catch up with us. Some men that we call the Sons of Liberty would go around and pressured the shopkeepers and said, we don't think you should even be selling British things. No, we don't want to buy it, and we don't think you should even sell it. So the Sons of Liberty pressured the shopkeepers to stop even selling British goods. And then we see the women start to get involved. They call themselves the Daughters. Just ignore all my spelling errors. I'm trying to talk and type, and it doesn't always work. The Daughters of Liberty would wove their own cloth. Which means that they didn't have to buy it from the British. How smart is that? Like, oh, I'm going to not buy stuff from you because I can do it myself. So the main person that's involved in this, you should recognize his name because he is the leader of the Sons of Liberty. And if you think about how a lot of these things are being kind of accomplished by the Sons of Liberty, the name that you need to know is Samuel Adams. Is kind of the leader behind this because he is the one that's getting the Sons of Liberty to do these things. Okay, so question number 11. This question is critical. We start to see the development of this as kind of a refrain, that the colonists are repeatedly saying no taxation without representation. And that becomes kind of their slogan. And what that means is that the colonists want a vote and a voice in Parliament. They say it's not fair for the government to continue to tax them if the government isn't allowing them to have a say. And what they are agreeing then is that if the government did give them a say, then they would stop their complaining about all of the taxation. Okay. All right. According to the Declaration of Independence, where does the government receive its power? Well, the Declaration is very specific, and it says that our government gets its power from the consent of the people, which means that the people have agreed that the government should have power over them. This really kind of connects with question number 11, because if the people have a voice in the government, they can agree to things like taxes. So the government gets its power from the consent of the people. Okay, our Continental Congresses. Why did the First Continental Congress meet? Well, the First Continental Congress met really in response to the Intolerable Acts. They wanted to organize, They wanted to organize resistance to the Intolerable Acts throughout the colonies, which means that they wanted every colony to be doing the same thing because there's power in numbers. When people agree and we have the same kind of protest, it's a lot more effective than when individual people are doing different things. Okay. Eventually, we have a Second Continental Congress, and those two Continental Congresses have a couple of things in common. Okay. Both of them send petitions to the King of England asking him, please end these taxes. These taxes are terrible. Please take them away and we'll be peaceful. Okay, and I would say that both of the Continental Congresses were the same in the fact that they both had a really strong desire for peace. So the second one should be a desire for peace. They don't want to be fighting against the British. Okay? They want to end that fighting. However, by the time we get to the Second Continental Congress, we really see that the colonists are feeling like they don't have a lot of choices anymore, and that they're kind of forced to continue on with declaring independence and separating themselves. Okay, so at the Second Continental Congress, they write our Declaration of Independence. And so what are the main ideas of that Declaration of Independence? Well, one of them is that free people should govern themselves, not a king, right? They don't think that a king is necessary anymore. And the other kind of main idea is that the government gets its power from the people. That it's not just in a king, right? That it's not just the king making the decisions, but that the people should be involved in making those decisions. That they should govern themselves. Okay, going back to some of our laws, we've got the Quartering Act. Okay, what was the Quartering Act? Well, it was a law that required that the colonists pay for both the housing and the supplies for the British soldiers. I can't spell today. British soldiers. This is an interesting law because remember, if you go back to the Proclamation of 1763, the British have sent 10,000 soldiers to the colonies, and they can't really afford to keep those soldiers in the colonies. And so the British say, well, colonists should pay for that. And the colonists say, we don't want the soldiers here. Please get rid of them. And so you see the Quartering Act really causing some conflict with the colonists. They see this as another tax. Okay, question 17 should be easy because I already answered it in an earlier question. Which tax was a direct tax on the colonists? It is the Stamp Act. Question 18. Why do the British wish to raise revenue in the colonies? Well, revenue is income, and it's because they have debt. They need to pay back their war debt. They owe a lot of money because of the French and Indian War being very expensive. And in order to pay that back, they want to raise their revenue, their income. Okay? All right, question number 19. What did the pamphlet Common Sense urge Americans to do? I love that this pamphlet is named Common Sense, right? Like that anybody should agree with this idea. And what it really convinces them, if I can spell, convinced Americans that a break with Britain was necessary. Okay, a lot of people before reading Common Sense weren't really sure that independence was necessary. Common Sense makes such strong arguments that people are willing to get rid of Britain after reading it. How powerful is that for a piece of literature? Okay, question number 20. Who is Patrick Henry and why was he important? Well, he is a Virginian, right? He is a member of the House of Burgesses, and he is really how am I trying to say this? He called for the people to resist this, in particular, the Stamp Act. Okay, he was willing to get up and say, it is time to protest, right? He convinced them that protest was necessary. He's really famous for saying, give me liberty or give me death. Okay. In fact, let's go ahead. Let's make that our code word that you're going to need for your Google Classroom. So the code word is his quote. Give me liberty or give me death. How powerful is that? That I'd rather die if I had to continue living this life. If I don't have liberty, I'd rather die. Okay. All right. Question number 21. The events of the Boston Massacre. So what happens at the Boston Massacre is that there's a fight. It broke out between a group of British soldiers and some Boston colonists. Probably started by the colonists, like kind of egging these soldiers on, but for some reason, the soldiers shoot and kill several colonists. This became a symbol of tyranny. The British use it as propaganda, or not the British, I'm sorry, the Sons of Liberty use it as propaganda to say, look, the British are killing us in the streets. Look at how terrible they are. They are tyrants. And people really believe that. Okay, we have two sides, the patriots and the loyalists. So if I'm going to give a definition to a patriot, this is a colonist who sided with the rebels in the revolution, right? They want to be on that rebel side. They believe in the ideas of the Declaration of Independence. They want to fight. They want to get rid of Britain, okay? The loyalists, I just copied and pasted, but I'm going to change this. The loyalists are on the side of the British. They think that the patriots are taking it too far. They think that they need to end the war, that things need to go back to being peaceful. They want to continue to be part of the British Empire. Okay. Question number 23, our biggest patriots, the Sons of Liberty. What role did the Sons of Liberty play in our fight for independence? They staged both peaceful and violent protests. So an example of a peaceful protest of the Sons of Liberty, boycotting. The Boston Tea Party is a peaceful protest. Violent protest might be something more like tarring and feathering a tax collector because you want to intimidate them into not doing their job. Okay, hopefully question 24 was the easiest one on the sheet for you. Who commanded the Continental Army? Our guy, George Washington, came to the Second Continental Congress wearing his military uniform. That's how much he wanted the job. And he does a great job. So chapter 7 then really gets us into the war itself. You don't need to know for the test a lot of specifics about the battles of the war. We're not going to ask you about that. But what you really need to think about is advantages and disadvantages and kind of what happens during the war in more of a broader sense. Okay, so it says on question 25, name 3 challenges that the Continental Army faced during the Revolution. And I'm going to do better than that. I'm going to name 5 of them for you. So one challenge that they had was that they didn't have enough supplies. And when I talk about supplies, I mean weapons, I mean food, I mean uniforms, things like that. It could be guns, it could be ammunition. They simply don't have enough of anything. Okay, and that is a huge problem. Another problem is, while they do have soldiers, waiting for my computer to catch up with me again. Sorry, you guys. Those soldiers are inexperienced. They are not trained professional military men like the British Army. These are just regular guys who believe in the cause, who are willing to leave their home and participate in the war. And so they're very inexperienced. We also see that the Continental Army is really disorganized, that they don't have a great plan, and that probably comes from the fact that they're really inexperienced. They don't already have like generals and things in place. Okay, so they are disorganized. We also know that they happen to be outnumbered, that there are more British soldiers than there are Continental soldiers, and that is a big problem. Another problem is that they have no navy. The Navy is critical in like moving supplies from place to place and also from fighting against the British on the sea. And at the beginning of the war, the Americans don't have it. They don't get it until the French step in and start to help them. Okay. All right. Question number 26. What 4 factors helped the Americans win the war? I'm going to do you one better. I'm going to give you 5. Okay. So probably the most important factor is that they have the motivation to win. They go into this war knowing that they are fighting for their own lives, knowing that they're fighting for their own freedom, and that if they lose, things are going to get worse, not better. And so the motivation factor for the Americans is huge. They also have good leadership. We're talking especially about George Washington, right? That he is a military strategist who thinks outside of the box. And so that becomes a huge part of why the Americans are able to win. They win in part because of their alliance with France. That France is able to send them necessary supplies. France sends them a navy. France sends them leadership. France sends them guns and ammo and troops. Probably couldn't have won without the French, which I spelled wrong. Sorry about that. I'll fix it for you. And another thing that the Americans have going for them is that they knew the land that they were fighting on, and Washington takes advantage of that. He's sending troops in back ways and having them mess with the British soldiers while they're trying to march from place to place and doing things that are helping give the Americans the advantage in battles when they probably didn't have the advantage. And another thing that really helps them be able to do that is that they have a good network of communication, that the Americans are talking to each other, they're sending messengers, they have a really good system of spies, and the communication probably is another huge factor in helping them win the war. So after the war, one thing that becomes like an important American idea is this idea of republicanism. And republicanism is simply that idea from the Declaration of Independence that a free people should govern themselves, that we don't need a king. People get to do it themselves. People can run the government. That's republicanism. Okay. All right. I already kind of answered this one. Number 28. How did France help the Americans to win the war? Well, they provided them, they provide money and supplies. They send troops, and they provide the Navy that the Americans really need in order to win. Okay, which allows the Americans to then win and develop their new ideas about government. Like question number 29 says, after the war, who did the Americans think should rule instead of a king? And the answer is the people. Like, let's give the people the power. No more kings, right? Power to the people. All right, question 30 is really two parts asking us about the Declaration of Independence. We're putting the Declaration into our own words. So part one, a quote from the Declaration of Independence says, "The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny." And what that's really saying is that King George III wants absolute power, right? He wants to be able to control the people. He doesn't want the people to have any kind of a say. And then this other quote from the Declaration of Independence says, "For imposing taxes on us without our consent." That means that what he is doing is taxation without representation. And the colonists say, you can't do that. You need to give us a voice in the government so that we can represent ourselves, and then we'll agree to your taxes. All right, I hope that helped. I hope that you are studying for your tests and that everyone's going to get a really good grade. Thank you. Bye.